Undercover boss buys a car at his own dealership, stops cold when he hears two customers behind him. The morning sun bathed the dealership lot in a golden glow, turning the sleek cars into gleaming jewels under the bright sky. Inside the glass-walled showroom of Reeve Automotive, salesmen stood poised like actors before a show, their sharp suits and practiced smiles staples of their trade. Every handshake, every movement, every carefully crafted offer was a calculated step toward maximizing profit. It was another busy day, just like any other, but today was different. Among the customers browsing the lot was a man who blended seamlessly into the crowd. His worn jeans, simple button-down shirt, and relaxed posture suggested he wasn't looking for anything flashy. To the sales staff, he was just another middle-aged man shopping for a car. But this man was Daniel Reeve. What they didn't know was that he owned the entire dealership chain. Daniel had built Reeve Automotive from the ground up, turning a modest startup into a sprawling network of dealerships spanning multiple states. His reputation for fair prices and quality cars had earned him respect, but as his business grew, so did the distance between him and its daily operations. Recently, troubling stories had begun to trickle back to him. Complaints about pushy salesmen, unfair trade-in deals, and dishonest pricing. On paper, everything seemed fine. Reports from his managers painted a picture of smooth operations and satisfied customers. But Daniel knew numbers never told the whole story. People did. And so, Daniel had come undercover, not as the CEO, but as a customer. He wanted to see firsthand how his employees treated people when no one was watching. He wandered among the rows of cars, pausing occasionally to run his fingers along the polished hoods. A salesman spotted him and quickly approached, his grin confident and practiced. "Good morning, sir. Looking for something in particular?" Daniel smiled, stepping into his role. "Yeah, I'm in the market for something reliable. Maybe a used sedan. Nothing too fancy." The salesman nodded enthusiastically. "We've got some great options. Let me show you what we've got." Daniel followed, listening politely to the sales pitch, but his attention was elsewhere. Years of experience had trained him to notice the subtle details, the nervous glances of employees, the body language of customers, and the murmurs of hushed conversations. Then, a tremulous voice cut through the hum of the showroom. "Please, isn't there anything else you can do?" Daniel turned slightly, his eyes landing on an elderly couple at the trade-in desk. The man stood tall but slightly hunched with age, his silver hair neatly combed. Beside him, his wife clutched his hand tightly, her face etched with worry. Outside, their car, a well-maintained but older sedan, sat parked, its modest appearance stark against the gleaming showroom models. Behind the counter stood Rick Larson, the sales manager. His demeanor radiated impatience, and his voice carried a sharp edge. "I'm sorry," he said with a shrug, practiced to feign sympathy. "This is the best I can do. That car isn't worth much. Honestly, you're lucky I'm offering this." The elderly woman's hand trembled as she wiped her eyes. "This car belonged to our son. He passed away last year. We kept it as long as we could, but we just can't afford the repairs anymore." Daniel's chest tightened. Rick sighed, clearly bored with their plea. "I understand this is emotional for you, but sentimental value doesn't add dollars to an appraisal. The market price is the market price." The woman's lower lip quivered. "It's not just a car to us," she whispered. "It's the last piece of him we have left." Her husband squeezed her hand, his jaw tightening as he struggled to remain stoic. But the pain in his eyes betrayed him. Rick, unmoved, tapped a pin against the desk. "The offer stands at $2,000. That's already generous, considering the mileage. If you want to move forward, we can do the paperwork now. Otherwise," he gestured dismissively toward the exit. Daniel felt his blood pressure spike. The cold indifference in Rick's tone was infuriating. This wasn't just a bad deal. It was exploitation. He stepped forward. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" Rick turned, irritation flashing in his eyes. "Sir, this is a private discussion." Daniel kept his tone neutral. "I'm sorry to intrude, but I couldn't help overhearing. I'm actually in the market for a car myself, and that sedan caught my eye." The elderly couple looked at him in surprise, while Rick's eyes narrowed. "It's not for sale. It's being traded in." Daniel rubbed his chin thoughtfully. I might be interested in buying it directly. What's the trade-in value? Rick hesitated before muttering, $2,000. Daniel raised an eyebrow. That's it? For a car in that condition? Rick's face darkened. It's an old model, and with that mileage, I'll offer $5,000, Daniel interrupted. The room fell silent. The elderly woman gasped. Oh no, we couldn't. Daniel held up a hand. Let's talk outside. Away from Rick's prying eyes, the couple shared their story. Their son had been a firefighter, a hero in their community. His car had been his pride and joy. After he passed away in the line of duty, they had held on to it as a cherished memory of him. But with mounting medical bills and their own declining health, they had no choice but to part with it. Daniel nodded, absorbing the weight of the couple's story. I'll buy the car from you, but not for trade-in, he said firmly. Harold's brow furrowed. Then why? Daniel smiled, his gaze steady. Because I don't want it to end up on some resale lot. I'll restore it and keep it in his memory. Linda's eyes welled with tears. You would do that? Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out his checkbook. It's not just a car, he said, scribbling the amount. It's a legacy. As he handed the check to Harold, the glass doors of the showroom burst open. Rick Larson stormed outside, his face flushed with fury. You can't just, Rick began. But Daniel turned to him with a calm, unreadable expression. We'll talk later, Rick, Daniel said evenly, his tone laced with authority. We'll have a long conversation about how you run things here. Rick froze, suddenly uneasy. Something in Daniel's voice sent a ripple of fear through him. He didn't yet realize who he was dealing with. The tension in the air was palpable as Daniel stood outside the dealership, the $5,000 check still firm in his grip. Harold and Linda Carter, their eyes glistening with hope, looked at him as though he'd just performed a miracle. Years of hardship and heartbreak melted into a fragile sense of gratitude. We don't know what to say, Harold murmured, gripping his wife's hand tightly. No one's ever done something like this for us, Linda said, her voice trembling. You don't even know us? Why would you do this? Daniel smiled warmly. Because some things are more important than money. He turned to the sedan, running his fingers gently over the hood. This car meant something to your son, and it means something to you. I don't believe in taking advantage of people just because business says I should. Harold swallowed hard, his voice thick with emotion. He would have liked you, he said quietly. The words struck Daniel deeply. Responsibility pressed on his shoulders like a heavy weight. Did his employees see him this way? Did his dealership still stand for fairness and respect? Or had it devolved into a machine preying on people like Harold and Linda? Before he could respond, the showroom doors slammed open again. Rick stormed out, his face contorted with anger. I need a word with you, Rick snapped, ignoring the couple entirely. Right now. Daniel exhaled slowly, slipping the check into Harold's hand. Go cash this, he said softly. Drive your son's car home with pride. Harold hesitated, but the gratitude in his eyes spoke volumes. He shook Daniel's hand firmly. Thank you. As the Carters walked away, Rick's fury erupted. What the hell do you think you're doing? Rick seethed, stepping closer. The stench of cheap cologne and desperation filled the space between them. Daniel remained calm. Helping a customer. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Rick scoffed. That's not how this works. He crossed his arms, lowering his voice. You just cost this dealership thousands of dollars. And you undermined my authority. Daniel arched an eyebrow. Authority? I didn't realize your job was to squeeze every last dime out of grieving parents. Rick's eyes flashed dangerously. Look, I don't know who you think you are. Who I think I am? Daniel's voice turned icy, cutting Rick off mid-sentence. He took a deliberate step forward, his demeanor shifting into something unyielding. Rick faltered, his confidence wavering. I own this dealership, Daniel said, his tone sharp and commanding. The words hit Rick like a thunderclap. His face went slack as the revelation sank in. What? He stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Daniel pulled a business card from his pocket and held it up. The Reeve Automotive logo gleamed under the sunlight. I'm Daniel Reeve, he said, his voice firm. The CEO. The man who built this company. Rick's entire body stiffened. And I just watched you disrespect those customers, lie about their car's value, and run this place like a scam operation, Daniel continued, his tone unwavering. Silence fell over the lot. Employees froze in their tracks, some pretending to work while sneaking glances. A few looked smug, as though they'd been waiting for this moment. Rick stammered. I didn't know. You didn't know who I was. Daniel cut him off, his voice cold. So you thought it was okay to take advantage of those people? Rick broke into a nervous sweat. Listen, Mr. Reeve, I was just doing my job, maximizing profits. Isn't that what you want? Daniel's stomach churned. Is this what my business has become? He thought. A machine preying on the vulnerable? He took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. No, Rick. That's not what I want. Rick shifted uncomfortably. Sir, if we start making emotional deals, we'll go under. It's business. No, Daniel snapped. It's greed. Rick opened his mouth to argue, but Daniel turned to the gathering employees. How many of you have been taught to press your customers? He asked, his voice cutting through the silence. Uneasy shuffling followed, but no one spoke. Daniel nodded, as though he'd expected this. How many of you have seen customers walk out of here feeling cheated? Again, silence. Then, a young salesman stepped forward hesitantly. His name tag read Chris. It happens a lot, Chris admitted. His voice was cautious but honest. Rick encourages it. He tells us to lowball trade-ins and push higher interest rates, especially on older customers or ones who don't seem financially smart. Rick spun on him. Shut your mouth. Chris shrank back, but Daniel held up a hand. No, Chris. Keep talking. Chris hesitated, then gathered his courage. A lot of us hate it, but we're afraid of losing our jobs. Rick turned pale. That's a lie. Daniel's eyes locked onto his. Is it? Rick's silence spoke volumes. Daniel turned back to the staff, his voice resolute. From now on, things change. Fair deals, honest pricing, and full transparency. Anyone who has a problem with that, walk out now. No one moved. Chris stepped forward again, his voice steady. Thank you, sir. Daniel nodded. Let's rebuild this place. The right way. As Rick stomped out in defeat, Daniel felt a quiet sense of finality. This wasn't just a business decision. It was the start of a revolution. The tension lingered in the air like the aftermath of a storm, thick and electric, as Rick Larson's footsteps echoed through the showroom. His retreat sounded like the final chords of a song that had overstayed its welcome. The employees watched in silence, their emotions a blend of relief and unease. Some exchanged furtive glances, while others, like Chris, the brave young salesman who had spoken up, wore expressions of cautious hope. Daniel Reeve, the Undercover CEO turned revealed owner, stood tall in the center of it all. He had just fired one of the most corrupt managers in his dealership, but he knew in his gut this was only the beginning. Scanning the room, his sharp gaze landed on the employees who had stayed silent, complicit in Rick's deceit. Let me be clear, Daniel began, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the thick silence. This isn't just about firing one man. This is about fixing what's broken. If any of you have been following the same dishonest practices, know this. It stops today. The room was deathly quiet. A middle-aged salesman, Tim, shifted uncomfortably before clearing his throat. Sir, with all due respect, Rick trained us to work this way. It wasn't just him. It's the system. Daniel nodded slowly, his expression grave. And that's exactly what I intend to change. A ripple of murmurs passed through the staff. Could it really happen? Change. Real. Actual change? Some had been trapped in this toxic culture for years, where deception was rewarded and integrity punished. What happens now? An employee asked hesitantly. Daniel took a deep breath. Now we clean house. By noon, Daniel had gathered every employee into the dealership staff lounge. The hum of the coffee machine was the only sound punctuating the nervous rustle of papers. Uncertainty hung in the air like a heavy fog. Leaning against a table, Daniel addressed them, not as a distant CEO, but as someone who had seen their struggles firsthand. I know what some of you are thinking, he began, his voice steady. You're wondering if this is just another corporate speech. Another, we're making changes talk that ends with nothing actually happening. Employees exchanged knowing glances. He wasn't wrong. I'm here to tell you. This time, it's real, Daniel continued, his tone resolute. We're not just changing a few policies. We're changing the way we do business, starting now. A few skeptics scoffed. One muttered under their breath, sure, until corporate gets involved. Daniel smirked. I think I've got enough pull to make this happen. And if you doubt that, remember, I just fired your boss in front of all of you. That shut them up. Chris leaned forward, his curiosity overriding his nerves. So, what does this mean for us? Daniel folded his arms. It means every sale from now on will be transparent. No more hidden fees, no more forced add-ons, and no more preying on customers who don't know better. A low murmur of agreement spread through the room. Tim sighed heavily. Sir, I agree with you. But some of us have families to feed. We've been making money the way we were trained. If we suddenly stop, how do we survive? Daniel nodded, acknowledging the concern. That's why I'm introducing a new commission system. From now on, bonuses will be based on customer satisfaction, not just sales volume. If you treat customers fairly, you'll still make money. In fact, you might make more. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. That's actually smart, Chris admitted, his eyes widening. Daniel chuckled softly. It's almost like I've done this before. Quiet laughter broke the tension. For the first time, the employees began to feel that change might not just be possible, it might actually be good. Later that afternoon, Daniel called a mandatory customer service review meeting. He pulled up a file containing every complaint and negative review his corporate office had received about this dealership in the past year. There were a lot. One by one, he read real stories from customers who had been deceived, ignored, or pressured into deals they didn't understand. One review stood out. I came in for a used car and was offered a deal that seemed fair at first. But when I got home, I realized they had added a $1,500 extended warranty I never agreed to. I called back, and the manager, Rick, told me it was non-refundable. I feel completely ripped off. I wouldn't recommend this dealership to anyone. Chris clenched his jaw. That's disgusting. Tim sighed, shaking his head. I remember that sale. She was a young mother. She didn't have much money. Daniel's gaze hardened. Then we're fixing it. He turned to his assistant. I want a list of every customer who was overcharged, misled, or treated unfairly. We're calling them back and making things right. The room fell silent again. You're serious? Chris asked, his voice almost a whisper. Daniel nodded. Dead serious. By late afternoon, Daniel was in his office, personally making phone calls. Hello, Mrs. Thomas. This is Daniel Reeve, the owner of Reeve Automotive. I wanted to call and personally apologize for how you were treated when you bought your car. The silence on the other end lasted a beat before the woman choked out a disbelieving laugh. Wait, you're the Daniel Reeve? You're calling me? Yes, ma'am. And I'd like to make things right. Her voice cracked with emotion. Months of feeling scammed and powerless melted into something softer. Hope. This wasn't just about money. It was about rebuilding trust. By the end of the day, Daniel leaned back in his chair, exhausted but satisfied. The dealership wasn't perfect. It was still healing, still learning. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like it was on the right path. Chris knocked on the office door, a grin spreading across his face. We just got 3 walk-ins asking if the rumors were true, if the owner was actually fixing bad deals. People are starting to notice. Daniel smiled. Good. Let's keep proving them right. The next morning, Reeve Automotive felt different. The air was lighter. The tension that had weighed down the showroom seemed to have lifted, at least partially. But Daniel knew one thing for sure. Change didn't happen overnight. What had happened yesterday was a statement. Today was the first real test. Daniel arrived earlier than usual, parking his car across the street to observe before stepping inside. Through the glass windows, he watched as employees trickled into the showroom. Some looked determined, ready to embrace the change, while others moved with uncertainty, still grappling with what this new way of doing business meant for them. Would they adapt, or would they resist, searching for loopholes? Daniel didn't expect perfection, but he did expect growth. As he finally entered, the faint buzz of activity greeted him. Chris, the young salesman who had spoken up against Rick, was already setting up his desk. He glanced up and grinned. "Morning, boss." Daniel chuckled. "You don't have to call me that." Chris smirked, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "Well, it's better than, hey, mysterious guy who pretended to be a customer." Daniel laughed, shaking his head. "Fair point." Tim, the older salesman, joined them, his expression thoughtful. "You really meant everything you said yesterday, didn't you?" "Every word," Daniel replied without hesitation. Tim sighed, a shadow of regret crossing his face. "Then I guess I owe you an apology." Daniel tilted his head. "For what?" "For standing by and letting Rick run this place the way he did," Tim admitted. "I saw a lot of things I didn't agree with, but I needed the job. I told myself it wasn't my place to question." Daniel respected the honesty. "You're here now, doing the right thing," he said firmly. "That's what matters." Tim gave a small nod, his shoulders relaxing. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a familiar couple, Harold and Linda Carter. The elderly pair from the day before entered with an energy Daniel hadn't seen in them before. Linda's eyes sparkled as she scanned the dealership, while Harold walked with purpose, his usual caution replaced with newfound confidence. Daniel immediately crossed the showroom to greet them. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," he said warmly, extending his hand. "I wasn't expecting to see you back so soon." Harold shook his hand firmly. "We wanted to thank you," he said, his voice steady. "Not just for what you did for us, but for what you're doing here." Daniel blinked, taken aback. Linda smiled gently. "Word spreads fast in this town, Mr. Reeve. People are talking about how you stood up for us, how you fired that awful man, and made things right. We're not the only ones who were mistreated." As her words settled, the glass doors swung open again. This time, a young woman in her mid-30s walked in, her expression a mix of frustration and cautious hope. She clutched a folder of papers against her chest, holding them like evidence in a courtroom. A receptionist approached, but the woman locked eyes with Daniel. "Are you the owner?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Yes. How can I help you?" She exhaled sharply, stepping forward. "My name is Rebecca Sanders. Last year, I bought a used car from this dealership, a Ford Explorer." Daniel motioned for her to sit. "Go on." Rebecca's voice trembled as she recounted her story. "The salesman told me I was getting a great deal, that my financing was affordable. But when I got home and looked through the paperwork, I realized they'd added fees I never agreed to." Daniel's jaw tightened. This was exactly the kind of deceit Rick had encouraged. "I tried calling back," Rebecca continued, her voice breaking, "but I kept getting the runaround. They told me it was too late to change anything. I ended up paying almost $3,000 more than I expected." Several employees shifted uncomfortably, the weight of her words pressing down on the room. Daniel inhaled deeply, his expression steady. "I'm sorry that happened to you." Rebecca searched his face, her eyes narrowing. She had been lied to before. "That's not enough," she said firmly. "I don't want an apology. I want to know what you're going to do about it." Daniel didn't flinch. "Let's pull up your file and see exactly what happened." Rebecca's eyes widened. "Just like that? Just like that?" Chris quickly retrieved her file from the system. The numbers were all there, clear as day. Daniel scanned the document, his eyes hardening. Everything Rebecca described had happened. Unnecessary fees. Inflated financing terms. Chris frowned. This contract was written by Rick. Daniel wasn't surprised. Rebecca crossed her arms, her tone sharp. "So?" Daniel leaned forward, meeting her gaze. "So, we're fixing it." Rebecca blinked. "Excuse me?" Daniel tapped the contract. "You were overcharged. That's unethical and I won't allow it." He turned to Chris. "I want the additional charges removed. Calculate what she overpaid and issue her a refund." The entire showroom fell into stunned silence. Rebecca's breath hitched. "You're serious?" "Completely." Her eyes filled with emotion. "I thought I'd never get my money back." Daniel offered a small smile. "Today, we changed that." Rebecca left the dealership with her check in hand, gratitude written all over her face. As Daniel watched her walk out, Chris approached, grinning. "You're not going to believe this. A customer just walked in asking if the rumors were true, that the owner is fixing bad deals." Daniel smiled, his resolve firm. "Good. Let's keep proving them right." The day was far from over, but the dealership had already begun to feel different. For the first time, Daniel saw a glimmer of what could be a business where trust replaced deception and integrity wasn't just a word, but a way of life. Daniel noticed something remarkable. Customers in the showroom had stopped pretending not to listen. Every interaction was being watched, every word dissected. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you see that?" someone murmured. "He just gave her a refund." Another replied in disbelief. "I've never seen a dealership do that before. Maybe this place really is different now." Daniel glanced at Chris and Tim. Chris looked proud, his chest puffed slightly, while Tim appeared deep in thought. Daniel smiled faintly. This wasn't just about one refund. It was about trust. And trust, once earned, could change everything. The following days at Reeve Automotive felt like a rebirth. With Rick Larson gone, the atmosphere shifted. Customers were treated with fairness, employees adapted to the new policies, and a sense of integrity filled the air. Some staff embraced the changes wholeheartedly, while others remained skeptical. Regardless, one thing was clear. Word was spreading fast. The morning after Rebecca's refund, Daniel arrived early to find something unexpected. A line of customers waiting outside the dealership. By the time the doors opened, phones were ringing off the hook. People wanted to know if the rumors were true. Could Reeve Automotive really be trusted to make things right? Chris rushed to Daniel's side, excitement in his voice. "Boss, I think we've started something bigger than we realized." Daniel smiled knowingly. That was the goal. But not everyone was pleased. By lunchtime, Daniel received a call he hadn't anticipated. The name on the caller ID made his stomach tighten. Michael Langford, owner of Langford Motors. Langford's dealership, located in the next town over, had long been Reeve Automotive's fiercest competitor. Unlike Daniel, Langford built his business on slick marketing, aggressive sales tactics, and cutthroat pricing. And now, he wasn't happy. Daniel picked up the phone. "Langford." The voice on the other end was smooth, but edged with tension. "Reeve, I've been hearing about what you're doing over there." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "And I'm warning you, buddy. You're setting a dangerous precedent." Langford's tone sharpened. "Refunding people? Offering fair deals? You think it stops here? This industry doesn't work like that." Daniel smirked. "No, it works by taking advantage of people. I'm done with that." Langford let out a sharp laugh. "You think you're some kind of hero? Newsflash, Reeve. This isn't a charity. Customers don't buy cars because they trust you. They buy from whoever gives them the best deal on paper." Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. "Maybe that's how you do business. I don't." Langford sighed dramatically. "Fine. Be the good guy. But don't expect it to last. Sooner or later, the bottom line will catch up with you." "Are you calling to threaten me, Langford?" Daniel asked evenly. "Because I've got a busy day actually helping customers." Langford chuckled darkly. "No, Reeve. I'm calling to let you know I'm coming for your customers. If you think I'll let you steal the spotlight, you're dead wrong." The line clicked off, leaving Daniel staring at the phone, his mind racing. By mid-afternoon, Langford's retaliation began. Chris burst into Daniel's office, his face pale. "Sir, we've got a problem." "What is it?" "Customers are leaving," Chris said hesitantly. Daniel frowned. "Why?" Chris exhaled. "Langford's undercutting every deal we offer." When Daniel stepped into the showroom, the evidence was clear. A middle-aged couple sat at Tim's desk, their expressions conflicted. "I appreciate the offer," the man said, "but Langford Motors just called. They're offering the same car for $2,000 less." Tim looked frustrated. "We've given you the best deal we can." The man shrugged apologetically. "We'd love to buy here, but that's a lot of money to pass up." Daniel stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Sir, may I ask you something?" The man nodded. "Did Langford tell you how they're making up for that discount?" The man blinked. "What do you mean?" Daniel leaned in slightly. "Did they mention the hidden fees, the inflated financing terms, The mandatory warranty add-ons they'll push at the last minute? The man's expression shifted uneasily. His wife glanced at him nervously. They didn't mention any of that. That's because they don't want you to know, Daniel said evenly. They lure you in with a lower price. But when you sit down to sign, the deal isn't what they promised. Tim pulled up a file on his computer. Look here, sir. We've had multiple customers come back to us after Langford tricked them. They thought they were getting a better deal, until they saw the final paperwork. The couple exchanged a look, doubt creeping into their faces. Finally, the man nodded. We'll stick with you guys. Daniel smiled. That's a smart choice. That night, as the dealership closed, Daniel gathered his staff. Langford is trying to kill our momentum, he said, his tone steady. He's using price as a weapon. Chris frowned. So what do we do? Drop our prices even lower? Daniel shook his head. No, we don't play dirty. We play smart. He turned to Tim. Pull up a list of every customer who's left a negative review about Langford Motors in the last 2 years. Tim's eyebrows shot up. Why? Daniel smirked. We're going to remind people what Langford really stands for. The next morning, Reeve Automotive launched a bold campaign. Personalized emails and social media messages went out to former Langford customers. The message was simple. If you were misled by Langford Motors, bring your paperwork to us. We'll review it for free. No tricks, no hidden fees, just honesty. Within hours, the calls started pouring in again. Reeve Automotive wasn't just surviving. It was leading a revolution. By midday, the first wave of customers arrived. By evening, the trickle had turned into a flood. People were furious. Some had been overcharged, others pushed into bad financing, and many tricked into add-ons they never wanted. Daniel and his team worked tirelessly, helping every single one. By the end of the week, Langford Motors was feeling the heat. Calls from angry customers flooded Langford's office, bad reviews spiked online, and his staff scrambled to contain the chaos. Then, Daniel received another call. It was Langford, and this time, he wasn't laughing. You think you've won, Reeve? Langford spat. His voice was sharp, venomous. Daniel's tone remained calm and steady. No, Langford. You ruined yourself. And with that, Daniel hung up. The air inside Reeve Automotive buzzed with energy. The past week had been transformational. Customers poured in, eager to escape Langford Motors' deceptive practices, and Reeve Automotive's tarnished reputation was mending faster than anyone had imagined. Daniel should have been celebrating, but he wasn't. He knew Langford wasn't the type to back down quietly. That afternoon, the dealership doors swung open with force. Michael Langford stormed in, flanked by 2 of his top sales managers. His usually pristine suit was slightly disheveled, and his face, normally smug and composed, was tight with frustration. Daniel, standing by the front desk, crossed his arms. Langford. His voice was calm. Langford forced a smirk. Reeve, I figured I'd come congratulate you. Looks like you're enjoying your little victory. Daniel tilted his head. Little victory? You mean restoring honesty to my business? Yeah, I'd call that a big one. Langford let out a short, humorless laugh. You really think this is sustainable? Refunds, canceled fees, all these good guy moves? He stepped closer, his tone dropping to a sneer. That's not how dealerships survive. Eventually, your numbers will drop, and your people will turn on you. Daniel held his gaze. My people are with me because they believe in what we're building. That's why we're winning. Langford's jaw tightened. You don't get it, do you? He hissed. You embarrassed me. Made a fool of my business. Daniel's eyes darkened. You did that to yourself. Langford's anger flared, his voice lowering to a growl. You should have stayed in your lane, Reeve. Is that a threat? Daniel asked, unmoved. A tense silence followed. Langford's fingers twitched, as if he wanted to lash out, but he held back. Instead, he turned and left, slamming the door behind him. That evening, a crisis struck. Chris rushed into Daniel's office, his face pale. Boss, you're not going to believe this, he said, handing Daniel his phone. Daniel scanned the screen, his jaw tightening. The headline read, Langford Motors exposes Reeve Automotive's refund scam. In an exclusive interview, Langford accused Reeve Automotive of misleading customers with selective refunds and claimed the dealership was losing money rapidly and nearing collapse. Chris shook his head. People are already talking. Some customers are second-guessing us, thinking this is all just a marketing stunt. Daniel's jaw set. Langford was trying to spin the truth, but Daniel wasn't about to let him win. The next morning, Daniel called a press conference. Cameras flashed as he stood outside Reeve Automotive, surrounded by reporters, customers, and employees. The energy was electric. Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady. "Good morning. I'm here to address the accusations made against my dealership." The crowd hushed. "Michael Langford says we're running a refund scam, that we're lying to customers, that we're going to collapse." Daniel paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. "Langford is right about one thing. Our business model is different, but it's not a scam. It's called integrity." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Yes, we refunded customers who were mistreated. Yes, we corrected bad deals. And yes, we took responsibility for the past. That's not deception. That's accountability." He looked directly into the cameras. "Langford Motors wants you to believe that honest business can't survive, that we need to deceive customers to make money. That's a lie, and we're proving it wrong." Suddenly, a man stepped forward from the crowd. It was one of Langford's former employees, a salesman. He held up a folder of papers, his face pale but determined. "I quit my job at Langford this morning," the man announced. The crowd turned toward him, reporters scrambling for their microphones. "Everything Daniel said about Langford is true." He handed the folder to a reporter. "These are records of hidden fees, fake discounts, and financing scams." The crowd gasped. Langford's own employee had exposed him. That evening, Reeve Automotive was flooded with customers. People who had doubted the dealership now lined up to do business. Meanwhile, Langford Motors was in free fall. News outlets ran stories on their fraudulent practices, customers demanded refunds, and within a month, Langford Motors shut down. A year later, Daniel sat at his desk, looking out at the thriving dealership. Sales were up, employees were happier than ever, and customers trusted them again. On his desk lay a letter from Harold and Linda Carter. Attached was a photo of their son's old car, fully restored. A handwritten note read, "Thank you for proving that good people still exist in business. Our son would have been proud of you." Daniel felt his chest tighten. What had started as a fight to save his business had grown into something greater, a legacy of honesty. And that, he realized, was worth more than any sale. Thank you for watching this incredible journey of integrity, resilience, and redemption. Daniel's story isn't just about running a business. It's about standing up for what's right, even when the odds are against you. If this story inspired you, if it made you believe that honesty can still triumph in a world full of shortcuts and deception, we'd love to hear from you. Hit that like button to show your support for businesses that choose integrity over profit. Subscribe to our channel to be part of a community that celebrates powerful, uplifting stories like this one. And in the comments, tell us, what would you have done in Daniel's shoes? Your subscription isn't just a number. It's a sign that stories like Daniel's matter. It's a way to say, I believe in honesty, courage, and second chances. So, if you believe the world needs more Daniels, more businesses that care, and more stories that move hearts, click that subscribe button now and join us on this journey. Because together, we can shine a light on the people and stories that deserve it most.